Before fire belonged to humanity, it was a boundary. It was the glowing line that separated the eternal comfort of the gods from the cold, shivering reality of everything else. We are taught that the story of Prometheus is a simple tale of charity, a kind titan who pitied the weakness of mortals and brought them a tool to stay warm. But ancient myths are never that simple. They do not exist to explain how we got the campfire. They exist to warn us about what happens when we reach across the dark and take something that was never meant to be ours. If you wish to explore these ancient stories with the depth they deserve, stripped of complications but filled with meaning, consider subscribing and joining us. Now, let us step back to a time when the world was silent, dark, and perfectly balanced. Look at any textbook, and the narrative is predictable. Prometheus steals fire, Zeus gets angry, chains him to a rock, and humanity lives happily ever after with their new technology. But if this was nothing more than an ancient explanation for a survival tool, why did the Greeks treat it with such profound dread? Why would a civilization build its entire understanding of progress around an act of cosmic treason? The truth is, the ancient listeners didn't see fire as just heat or light. They saw it as a spark of divine sovereignty. To give fire to humans wasn't just giving them a way to cook meat. It was giving them the keys to build their own empires, forge their own weapons, and eventually challenge the skies. The conflict between Prometheus and Zeus wasn't a petty argument between an angry king and a rebel. It was a fundamental debate over whether humanity should even be allowed to progress, or if our ambition would ultimately consume us. To understand why this gift was so dangerous, we have to look at the world before the flame. The old traditions tell us that the gods had won their great war against the Titans. Order had been established on Mount Olympus under the watchful eye of Zeus. The world was quiet, but it was empty. Zeus commanded two Titan brothers who had remained loyal to him to populate the earth: Prometheus, whose name means foresight, and Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought. Epimetheus took the lead. He was enthusiastic but impulsive. He began distributing gifts to the creatures of the earth. To the lion, he gave strength and sharp claws. To the eagle, he gave keen vision and powerful wings. To the deer, he gave speed, and to the bear, thick fur to withstand the freezing nights. He handed out armor, venom, camouflage, and flight until his basket was completely empty. Then he looked down at humanity. Man was left naked, fragile, and utterly defenseless in the mud. We had no claws to hunt, no fur to keep out the frost, and no speed to run from the predators tracking us through the ancient forests. Humanity was an afterthought, facing an immediate and silent erasure from the world. Prometheus looked upon this unfinished creation with something the other gods rarely possessed: empathy. He knew that without a drastic intervention, his creations would perish in the shadows of the earth. But his first act of rebellion wasn't the theft of fire. It was a test of authority. At a place called Mycenae, a great gathering was held to decide how humans would honor the gods. Prometheus was asked to divide a massive ox into two offerings, one for the divine rulers of Olympus and one for the mortals to keep for sustenance. Prometheus used his foresight to construct a brilliant deception. In one pile, he placed the rich, nourishing meat, but hid it inside the unappealing stomach of the beast. In the second pile, he stacked the bare, useless white bones, but wrapped them beautifully in glistening, rich fat. He invited Zeus to choose first. Zeus, seeing the shining exterior, chose the pile of fat and bones. When the ruler of Olympus realized he had been tricked into accepting the worthless parts of the sacrifice, the air turned cold. This wasn't just a lost meal. It was an insult to his supreme wisdom. Prometheus had proven that human survival would come at the expense of divine dignity. In retaliation, Zeus did not strike down Prometheus. Instead, he struck at his creation. He withheld the one element that could elevate humanity above the beasts. He hid the sacred fire, leaving the mortal world in absolute, freezing darkness. This is where the myth shifts from a story of divine politics into a heist that changed the cosmos forever. Prometheus looked down at the dark earth. He heard the cries of humanity freezing in their caves, surrounded by a wilderness that was ready to reclaim them. He knew the consequences of defying Zeus a second time, but his foresight also showed him a future where humanity could become something grand. He climbed the heights of Mount Olympus, walking through the marble halls where the sacred flames burned eternally on the altars of the gods. Quietly, without the rustle of robes or the sound of footsteps, he approached the hearth. He held out a hollow stalk of a fennel plant, a natural conduit that could conceal a spark within its fibrous interior. He caught a single ember of the divine fire, sealed it inside the stalk, and slipped back down into the mortal realm. When he reached the valleys below, he struck the ground. The first human campfire roared to life. Imagine that moment. To the ancient people huddled in the dark, that flame was a miracle. It drove back the predators. It melted the frost. It illuminated the walls of their caves, allowing them to paint their stories, to speak, to gather, and to think. But up on Olympus, Zeus looked down and saw the darkness of the earth broken by thousands of tiny, flickering lights. The mortal world was glowing. The fury of the king of the gods was absolute, but his punishment was calculated with terrifying precision. For Prometheus, the penalty was isolation. The Titan was carried to the desolate peaks of the Caucasus Mountains, where he was bound to a jagged rock with unbreakable chains forged of bronze and iron. He was left exposed to the blistering sun and the freezing winds, visited every day by a massive eagle that served as the instrument of Zeus's will, ensuring an endless cycle of confinement and isolation on the edge of the world. Yet, Zeus knew that punishing the giver wasn't enough. The gift was already down there. It could not be taken back. So, he engineered a countergift for humanity, something that would ensure fire would always cost them dearly. He commanded the gods to forge the first woman, Pandora, and endowed her with grace, curiosity, and a sealed jar containing forces that humanity was never meant to witness. When she arrived on Earth, driven by the curiosity the gods had woven into her very being, the jar was opened. In an instant, hardships, diseases, toil, and anxiety swept across the earth, blanketing the human race. The age of innocent survival was over. Humanity had the fire, but they now had the heavy burden of survival in a broken world. This is where the myth becomes more than a story. To the ancient listeners, these details did not feel random. They were trying to name a terrifying pattern that sits at the very center of human progress. Fire is not just a tool. Fire is the first true technology. Before fire, humans lived in nature. We conformed to the world around us, just like the wolves, the deer, and the lions. We moved when it was cold. We hid when it was dark. But the moment we accepted Prometheus's gift, we stopped conforming to nature and began forcing nature to conform to us. With fire, we cleared forests to build cities. We melted rocks to forge bronze and iron. We created weapons to wage wars on a scale the world had never seen. Fire gave us independence, but it also gave us the capacity for total self-destruction. This is the hidden pattern the Greeks understood so deeply. Every technological spark carries an inherent curse. When we invent something that solves a fundamental human problem, we inevitably create a completely new category of suffering. The fire kept us warm. but it also burned down our homes. The metallurgy that built our plows also built our swords. The intellect that allows us to master our environment also detaches us from the natural balance of the earth. Zeus wasn't acting out of pure cruelty. In the ancient view, Zeus represented cosmic order. He understood that boundaries exist for a reason. Animals live by instinct. Gods live by wisdom. Humans were meant to occupy the space in between. By taking the fire, humanity stepped out of their assigned place in the cosmic hierarchy. We became too powerful to be mere animals, but too flawed to be gods. The chains that bound Prometheus to the rock were not just physical restraints. They were a vivid image of the permanence of our choices. Prometheus is the embodiment of human intellect bound to the earth, suffering for its foresight, watching from afar as its creations struggle with the consequences of its own genius. Across many ancient traditions, we find a strikingly similar memory. The details are different, but the fear of forbidden knowledge is identical. In the ancient Near Eastern traditions, we find the story of the Garden of Eden. There, it is not a flame inside a fennel stalk, but a fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Like Prometheus, a figure encourages humanity to take what belongs to the divine. The result is exactly the same. Human eyes are opened, autonomy is gained, but they are instantly cast out of paradise into a world of labor, pain, and mortality. In Norse mythology, the figure of Loki constantly plays with fire and forbidden boundaries, crossing between the realms of gods, giants, and humans. While he often helps the gods, his chaotic brilliance eventually brings about the destruction of the cosmos itself. Even in the legends of Polynesia, the demigod Maui journeys into the underworld to steal fire from the goddess Mahuika for the benefit of mortals. He succeeds, but the process alters the landscape forever, bringing volatility and danger along with the warmth. These stories are not copies of one another. Instead, they show us that ancient peoples across the globe looked at human civilization and noticed the exact same paradox. They looked at our buildings, our laws, and our tools, and realized that our rise did not happen naturally. It required a fracture. It required someone to break the rules of the universe, and we have been paying the fine for that infraction ever since. Why does this story continue to echo through our modern world? Because we are still holding Prometheus's flame, and it is burning brighter than it ever has before. Every time history enters a new era of progress, the ghost of Prometheus returns. When scientists split the atom, they openly admitted they had unleashed a new kind of fire, a spark that could provide limitless energy or reduce the planet to ash in a single afternoon. Today, as we stand on the edge of developing artificial intelligence and altering our own genetic code, we are standing in the halls of Olympus once again. We are reaching for tools that belong to the realm of creation and destiny. We are driven by the exact same optimism that guided Prometheus, believing that our foresight can save us from our limitations. But we still haven't learned how to manage the contents of the jar that followed the fire. We struggle with the anxieties, the systemic fractures, and the unintended consequences of our own brilliance. We live in a world of unprecedented comfort, yet we are plagued by a modern sense of isolation and uncertainty. We are more powerful than our ancestors ever dreamed. Yet we feel entirely helpless against the systems we have built. The myth of Prometheus endures because it is a mirror. It reminds us that our greatest strength, our relentless desire to know, to build, to overcome, is also our deepest vulnerability. We often wonder if Prometheus ever regretted his choice as he looked down from the mountainside at the chaotic, beautiful, and violent world he had built. But perhaps the true warning of the story is that the flame can never be returned to the gods. Once the spark is lit, we have no choice but to carry it through the darkness, hoping that our wisdom can match our power before the fire consumes us. And maybe that is why the myth survived, because the danger was never really the flame itself. The danger was always what we would choose to burn with it. If you want more ancient myths explained in this simple but deeper way, subscribe, turn on notifications, and explore the next story with us.